This week's episodes were brought to you by the generous support of Yukofin. Hey folks, Quilly here, and welcome to another episode of our mostly civilized Hex engine project in Unity 3D. We still have a little bit of UI things that I'd like to do actually to improve, like making it more obvious when we've got a particular unit selected over here. But I think we'll come back to that in a second. What we're going to do in this episode is we're going to work on improving the unit's domove function over here, which was just until the end of the last episode called doTurn. But really, it's about a domove, and in fact, I think I want this to return a Boolean. I want this function, so this does the move. Excellent. Processes one tile worth of movement for the unit. And the return value is actually going to be something like returns true if this should be called immediately again. And what do I mean by that? Well, your units, like your default unit, will have a movement rate of 2. So let's say we have a big queue of movement in our hex path. So we call this at the beginning of turn while we have 2 movement available. DoMove will move 1 tile. We'll still have 1 unit of movement left. Therefore, this will return true, because you should call DoMove immediately again after maybe playing the animation of movement or something like that, right? We're going to give the system a chance to play the movement animation, because this is going to return instantaneously. But they'll probably be, when we actually do the move, i.e. when we actually set our hex over here, one of the things we do is call this onUnitMoved helper function, which is telling our visual system to, hey, move the 3D model of the unit from this tile to this tile over here, and presumably do some sort of animation. What I expect is that the code that's responsible for doing this animation is probably going to set some sort of flag to let the system say, hey, I'm currently playing an animation here, so just hold up on processing any of their logic. Because really, there's nothing stopping us from just calling DoMove on all units just simultaneously back to back, and instantly moving all units to their final destination. But we don't want that. We want any unit that's on the screen to actually sort of pause the processing for a second to allow animations to play out so that the user can actually see the units moving in a manner that's a little bit more sensible. But there's no reason we couldn't just go through this instantaneously. But that's the idea. We return true if we've got more stuff to do. We return false if we don't need to be called again immediately. Either because we don't have any movement left this turn, or because we don't have anything left in our path, which is a whole nother thing, right? There'll be some sort of logic for it does something like public bool can unit waiting for orders. The idea being something like returns true if we have movement left but nothing queued. Yeah. So if movement remaining is greater than 0 and hex path is, I think this can be null. Yeah. So if the path is null or hexpath.count. I think we always set it to null when we don't have one, but you know, belt and suspenders, right? If hex count is equal to 0. So either the path is null or the path is empty, but we have movement left, that means we would like to be issued some orders. The other thing you can do in here, right? Let's split this up a little bit like this, is something like to do. Maybe we've been told to fortify/alert or skip turn. Right? These are all flags that could be set, which would be another reason we wouldn't be waiting for orders. So that's something that can be implemented later on. Wouldn't be hard. So in this case, we'd return true. So if we have movement remaining and we haven't been told to fortify, etc., then we return true. Otherwise, we return false. Depending on if this if starts to get really sort of clumsy, then you might want to go and invert the logic. Is assume we're going to return true, and otherwise just check for things that might be good reasons to return false. All right, but there we go. So right now movement remaining is greater than 0, and we don't have a path. We return true that we're waiting for orders. Yes, good, excellent. Okay, so we are in the domove over here. If the hex path is null or the count is 0, that would be a reason to return false. You don't have to call us right away because we don't have anything else left in a queue. We're going to set the hex over here, and then what we're going to do is return, at this point, if hex path, we're going to return if hex path not equal to null. So we were going to return true if we should be called again. The only reason we should be called again is if hex path is not empty. Oh, and movement remaining is greater than 0. Well, it's a little fuzzier than that if we're using movement rules like Civ 6. If we're using movement rules like Civ 6, then the cost to enter a tile is a wee bit different. Right, but we don't actually factor in the cost to enter the tile. Not yet. Because we never change movement remaining. Now would be the time to implement that. Okay, so we want something like, we need int cost to enter. So this is going to be, what is the movement cost to enter the new hex? And then we've got to put in a if cost to enter is greater than movement remaining, and our movement rules are like Civ 6. Then in that case, we can't enter the hex this turn. Oh, unless, so if the cost to enter is greater than movement remaining, and movement remaining is less than our total movement, because we're still allowed to enter, even in Civ 6 tiles, we're allowed to enter a tile if we have 100% of our move. If the tile costs 3 to enter, but we're at 2 of 2 movement, we have a movement rate of 2, but we haven't used any, we're at 2, we're still allowed to enter. So the only reason we're not allowed to enter is if it's movement rules like Civ 6, the cost to enter is greater than our movement remaining, and our movement remaining is less than our total movement. That would be the one exception that says we can't enter the hex this turn, in which case what we do is we return false to say, no, we can return right away because we can't actually perform the move. Ooh. But we've already DQ'd it. And we can't peek further. And a queue is pretty strict about... We sort of almost need to re-queue our old hex. And say, never mind. I think what we're going to do is just change Hex-Based from being a queue to something else. Because we can't... I can't in-queue you to the front. Because that's just literally not allowed. I suppose we could recreate the queue. But at this point, are we just like shooting ourselves in the foot? Can you add... You could insert in front with an array and then keep removing things. Okay, again, logically the queue is the correct structure for us. It's not really... Because we don't actually process these lists very often one way or another, we don't actually care about the optimal solution time-based. Yeah, I guess we're going to just change you. You're not going to be a queue anymore. You're going to be a list. It sucks, but that's the way it goes. There might be another data structure that works out better, but I don't think so. So everywhere that interacts with the hex path, you are a new list of hexes. You are a new list of these. To array is fine. That's all good there. count, count, count. So you don't DQ. Instead, it's at position 1, or position 0 is there. New hex is 1. Like that. Hexpath dot remove at 0. This is the thing. Doing something like this causes a certain amount of shifting. But we can insert at, right? Yeah. Insert at the 0th spot. We're going to put it back in. Although now that we have the ability to peek, because the problem is we could only peek at the first thing. Now that we can peek a little further down, what we can do is just delay the remove. That's probably way better. Yeah. That way we don't have to shuffle this quite as much. So now we can look at our current one without DQing it, and then that means we can peek at the next thing in the list without DQing it. We can verify that this is the only situation where we're not allowed to enter that tile on this turn. We check that first, and then assuming we're here, it means we're allowed to enter the tile this turn. So we remove the first thing in the list, which is the hex we are leaving, is gone from the list. Is the only thing in the list just the new hex that we're about to move to? In which case, we're going to set this to null, just because it's a nice way to clean it up, it looks like. Then we'll set that to the new hex. And then, again, we'll check to make sure whether or not we should return true or anything over here. Okay. Any other references to hexpath? I suppose we'd get an error at this point if we were doing something like using Q, in Q or DQ or something like that somewhere. But it looks like we've covered it. I suspect I'm going to have to stop and start. I think we're okay here. Let's find out. If I select you and say, hey, move over there, and then hit space, and space, and space, we're okay. And in theory... Oh, we're still not changing our movement remaining. Okay. So we move there, and that means at this point we can say something like movement remaining is going to be equal to, because I would just like to reduce this by cost to enter, but that might send us to a negative number, and I could just check for that after, but it's probably a little cleaner to say something like, right, they're floats, no. So something like, we want to set you to the biggest of either movement remaining, minus cost to enter, or 0. That will prevent us from going 0. We could also use a clamp or something like that, but that's going to be okay. So this prevents us that... so if movement remaining minus cost to enter leads to a negative number, then 0 will be the biggest of the two, so we'll use that instead. So there we go. So that'll update that. So again, if I run this, and we look at our little control panel on our dwarf, so select you, move you over here, movement is 2, Q's length is 6, hit space, there you go, movement is 1. Now, because we're using Civ 5 style rules, if I hit space again here, right now it's going to allow us to go in there. But in a sense, like the 0 movement, we really shouldn't be allowed to move. It should mean if we have a 0 movement that domove shouldn't be called in the first place. But I suppose we can say something like movement remaining is less than or equal to 0. Then we're going to return false. Don't call me ever again. The problem is if something is calling domove in the first place when we have 0 movement, is it wrong or not? I don't know. I guess there's no reason for our... I think it's our hex map is responsible for calling domove. No? What is? Not declaration. Sorry. Find references. It is in our hex map. Oh, in the update function. Right. Our update function over here calls domove. Like, it's a great question. Is there any reason we should check here if a unit should be moving? I think the answer is no. I think the answer is no. Domove should just check to see if it needs to do anything or just return immediately. And I think that's better. I think that keeps it cleaner here. We're not checking a bunch of internal states of unit to see if domove should be called. Domove's going to be responsible for its own thing. But what we are going to do is something like this. We're going to say while domove. So this is going to call domove. And as long as domove returns true, we're going to do what's inside the loop here. So first, I'm going to put in a little debug so we can catch a couple of like weird things. You know, something like domove returned true will be called again. And then something here, something like to do check to see if an animation is playing. If so, wait for it to finish. And this would be an excellent example. The best time or the best way to do that waiting is to use a coroutine. And I rarely use coroutines because for almost every example I can think of in a coroutine, I'd probably rather do something with a thread, although it means you can't access the Unity engine, yada, yada, yada. Coroutines are wonky because you have to choose how long to pause and do different things like that. But this is exactly what it's for. You're really just waiting for something like that Unity is doing that processes over a number of frames. We're not doing any work. I guess that's what I should say. I don't like to use coroutines for something to break up a job that's going to take a long time and might cause the user interface to hang. In this case, we're not using coroutines to do some time management on a job. We're using a coroutine to wait for an animation to finish. We're using a coroutine to wait for some external state, and I think that's exactly the sort of thing we want to do. I believe that update is normally automatically called as a coroutine, so we should be able to do some waits in there. But I mean, we don't actually have like. We don't have the rest of the stuff implemented, so we'll figure things out. But it's going to be something like, you know, if animation is playing, like set some sort of flag, then we do something like, you know, like, what is it, like yield return null or something like that. That's just like, we're just going to literally wait for one frame. I think we're going to do something like that. But I'll double check on this. Again, coroutines is not something I use very often because I feel like most cases where you use a coroutine, probably a thread or something like that, is actually going to lead much more to the behavior that you want. But we'll see how that goes. So yeah, so right now we'll just instantly call domove again. So what should happen here, hopefully we don't get an infinite loop. I'm going to hit play. I'm going to click on the dwarf. I'm going to click over here, and what should happen is the dwarf should move to here and here. Now, the way our animation code is running, he'll be instructed to start the animation to move here, but then we're instantly going to tell the dwarf to go to the next tile, because do move is going to be called twice in a row back to back. So it'll cut short the first animation and actually teleport him here, and then smoothly animate him there. That's what I expect to see when I let go. Burr? No, of course not. Not when I let go, when I hit the spacebar. 1, 2, 3. That's exactly what happened. Perfect. Do move got called twice. We called do move, and it returned true to say, hey, I still have movement left, and I still have movement in the queue, so you should call me again right away. So indeed, that's what the code does. It calls it right away, starts the second animation, which kills the first one, and just starts that right away, because that's the way we've implemented it. Good. So all we'd have to do is wait. So, hold on. Unity, coroutine. I mean, update. I think I can just run that line. I mean, I guess I should just try it and see. Where's the coroutine code in this page? So, in theory, now I don't have if animation is playing. Right? Let me set this to bool animation's playing is false. So first of all, this should compile. It's because you're set as a void here, but I can just set you... Can I just set the update to an IEnumerator? And will it be called that way? IEnumerator. Or do I have to call it an external subroutine? Update cannot be a coroutine. Okay. I think maybe if you're working in JavaScript, that might be the thing. So I actually want something like IEnumerator over here. IEnumerator. Over here, which is something like do unit moves, like that. And I want to move all this logic out to do unit moves. And instead, when we hit spacebar, what we want to do is we want to start a coroutine, which is the do unit moves coroutine. You can start it as a string, or you can put in an actual reference to a function, so that's going to be okay. So now we've got that. This always has to return something. I guess it just has to have a return function somewhere in there. If it just ends, I guess it's probably okay. Let's see here. Right. Like that. Okay, hit play. Cue up the movement. Oops. And hit spacebar. Excellent. Okay, so now we just have to set this flag to animation is playing. For now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make this public. This is definitely not what we're going to want to do in the long term. But let's, just to see if this can work, is we're going to set this public animation is playing is equal to true. And the thing that animates our unit is the unit view over here. What we're probably going to want to do is like set up some sort of system for queuing animations. But let's worry about that later. So what we're going to do is something like this. On unit move triggers an update, which starts moving us. And what it should do over here at some point. That's the teleport. So if there's a teleport instruction, then we won't do anything else. But otherwise, we know it's going to be a smooth movement. Therefore, we're going to do something like get game object dot find object of type hex map dot animation is playing and set it to true. So this is like to do. We need better signaling system and or animation queuing. Okay? This is sort of just a temporary thing, but we'll sort it out later. And then over here, if how do we check to see if smooth damp is done? I think if the current velocity, there's a check or something. How do we know if it's completely finished? Because it just returns the new vector. Anyways, we just check to see if the two are done. If current velocity is modified every time. If the position is equal to new position or is at least very close. That's probably okay. We can probably say something just for now. I don't know, to do, figure out the best way to determine the end of our animation. So we're just going to say something like if vector 3 dot distance between our current position and the target position is less than something like that, something pretty small, then we're going to consider that to be the end, and we'll just signal that all animations are done. Of course, the big problem with this is it's very easy for multiple things to be setting these flags and resetting them. This is not the correct solution, but what should happen here is I hit play. This is just checking to see the generic flow and logic is working. I select the dwarf. I tell the dwarf to move over here. When I hit the spacebar, what should happen now is it should trigger domove to move here, but this animation will set a flag and say we're animating. And then the hex maps domove code should, or do unit moves code, will then be stuck in that enum loop. This is an if. It's got to be changed to a while anim is playing, it's going to do this. And what this says is wait 1 frame. There we go. Select, click. I'm going to hit spacebar now. It should move to here, then move to there. Excellent. I think what we'll do is we will tell the animation that it can finish a little sooner. Something like this. If we're within 10%, it's probably okay. because it was taking a little longer to reach the end. Part of it because it's a smooth damp. We actually might want it to be a full linear move. But that's, you know, go there, go there. Excellent. If I hit spacebar again, well, actually nothing will happen because it has 0 movement left. It's when we hit the actual next turn button, then what it should do is just reset all the units' movement back up to 2, or rather to its max, and then we can keep going. But that movement logic is getting in there. We definitely need something better and a little smarter. I suspect what's going to happen is we're going to have some sort of thing where we actually, we might even use something like, what do we use like lambdas? Some sort of list of events, or not actual events, but like, I think this needs something like a list of pending animations. So you can in-queue an animation and say, listen, I want this animation to happen. And so instead of doing it directly in the unit view, it's as part of like a sub-function that we then pass to a queue that then gets run perhaps by hex map, and then this animation, like the do animation code, should return true or false as to whether it's done or not. And then if it's done, it should be removed from the animation queue and probably signal when the animation queue is empty. That's when we go ahead and advance the next unit. This is going to become pretty relevant when it's, you know, we're talking about like combat between 2 units. Again, we're going to want to make sure to wait until a combat animation is played before we make any other moves or accept any more inputs or something. So there will have to be some sort of system for globally signaling to the game, hey, I'm doing an animation right now, so don't do any more game logic. I mean, the animation shouldn't freeze the game. You should still be able to like maybe move the camera, do that sort of thing. But we need to make sure that no other inputs are truly being processed in terms of unit commands, nor should any other commands, units like continue on with their movement queue until that's done. And it will really be something like a flag, like what we just set up over here with the animation is playing, but I think it's going to have to be a smarter flag to stop 2 different animations from accidentally obliterating each other. That's why the queue is quite good, right? Right now, what we'd have to do is something like, in unit view, if animation is playing, then we have to pause and wait until the animation is done there before we start our own, yada, yada, yada. Whereas if all we do is in queue, some sort of function that's going to handle an animation, then we know our animation's not going to start playing until the previous one is done playing. And note that these types of animations are different from like an idle animation, or, you know, like water like swooshing up on the shore. Like some animations will just play constantly. This is a specific sort of subset of game mechanic movements that we want to make sure animate one at a time so that the player can see what is happening in a sequence of actions. So yeah, anyway, I think that brings us to the end of today's video. I'm quite happy with that. I'm happy with the do unit moves. I guess what we'll end up with is some sort of public void end turn, right? Or next turn, or something like that. But end turn, I think, is going to be clear. It's going to probably be linked to a button. I think the button normally says in these Civ games, like, next turn, but it might be end turn. Either way, what it's going to do is something like this. First, check to see if there are any units that have in-queued moves, right? Because your button over here that says next turn will also say things like, you know, unit waiting for orders or yada, yada, yada. At some point, when there are no units waiting for orders, it will say next turn. But a unit may not have moved, but is not waiting for orders, right? We actually have that waiting for orders over here. A unit could have movement remaining, but not be in a waiting for order state if it has movement queued. And so the first thing that the end turn button will do is go through the units, find any units that have stuff queued and movement left over, in which case it's going to process all of those. And what might happen is it might knock us out of the end turn state. Imagine a unit has two movement left. It's a 2 of 2 movement. Hasn't moved yet this turn, and it's got stuff in its queue, probably from a previous turn, but it's only got 1 tile left in its queue. So during this end turn processing, it moves that 1 tile, realizes now, like, okay, I have nothing left in the queue, but I still have 1 movement. Therefore, I am now waiting for orders, in which case the end turn function will stop and will update the button to say, oh, a unit is waiting for orders. Like that sort of logic going through. The next thing that's going to happen is check to see if any units have queued moves. Do those moves. Now are any units waiting for orders? if so, halt, end turn. Then after that, we do something like go to next player if you had more than one player. And then finally, I guess what we do is actually something like reset unit movement. Maybe like heal units that are resting. Reset unit movement. So this would be something as simple as for each unit in this. Well, I mean, really, it's something more like units for this player. Clearly, where's my unit list? Define. To do separate unit list for each player. Did I spell separate wrong? Oh, no, I did. For some reason, I always think it's got an E. I think because I say separate as opposed to separate. Separate. Separate? I don't know. Anyway, it's just one of my little things. That's probably what we want, right? Because at the end of the turn, clearly we should only be doing things for one unit, but that's okay. So u.movement remaining is... Well, actually, what I should do is probably something like reset movement or something like that. Maybe refresh? Refresh movement. I like that. Because resetting implies, like, maybe, you know, canceling the queue or something weird like that. But that's not what's going on. So we're going to want some sort of public void refresh movement over here, which just sets movement remaining is equal to the actual movement rate of the unit. And there you go. Just like that, you have a new turn. So yeah, we'll look at wiring up, I think, that end turn button a little bit more later on. The other thing that still doesn't happen is when our mouse control happens and we are in unit movement and we set the hex path, here we need a to-do, actually probably, well, I don't know, somewhere. To-do, tell unit and or hex map to process unit movement, right? Actually, that probably wouldn't take too long. What if instead, in hex map over here where it says do unit moves, what if in here we had another, this would also need an I enumerator, do unit move, do all unit moves. And this is just single do unit moves. So it would need a unit U like that. So we would return, I think, return do unit move like this. I don't think we'd start another subroutine. I think we would just return whatever this thing is starting to like yield and return and stuff. So let's check to see if this is functional. Maybe you need that actually. I'm not sure. Yeah, and I don't do tons of coroutine stuff, so the syntax keeps catching me off guard. If I select you and tell you to move over here, and then hit spacebar, excellent, you're still working. So that's working well. So now, do all unit moves just runs through each unit, and each one of those is the coroutine that does the waiting. The nice thing about this is, under mouse control here, I can do something like start coroutine. Do I have a copy of the map? Hex map dot do unit move for the selected unit, like that. So hit play. So assuming I've done it right, when I let go of the right mouse button, the move should happen right away. And it does. Lovely. Look at that. Look at that. Now, no other moves will happen right now because he's got no movement available, but yeah, Because that's exactly the logic you want normally. When you click on this, actually what I could do is do this. He'll do the move. He still has one movement left, so I could click here. He'll do the move. Lovely. And now anything else won't happen because he's out of movement because there's no next turn processing. Oh, how glorious is that? Is he next to a hill? Any chance? No, he can't move to the mountain. That's no good. Yeah, he's not right next to any hills, which is too bad because it would be nice to just double check that. Oh, right, of course, that would totally work because we don't have Civ 6 style movement. So you can move to here and there because this is Civ 5 style movement we've got enabled right now. If you move to here, you've got one move left, which in Civ 5 is enough to get you up onto the hill. Haha! All right, that makes me really happy. I guess what we could do is just check. I think we've got it in here, right? Let's set the Civ 6 style movement to true. We haven't really done any testing for this, but this would be an excellent time to do it. Select you, move you here. Now, try to move you up here. Nothing happens. It's got it in the queue. He's still got his one move, which means I could actually say, oh, never mind, go here since you can't move. Yeah. Oh, that's so sweet. Excellent. Love it. Wonderful. Thank you very much for watching another episode, folks, and I'll see you guys next time. Thank you to all the July Patreon supporters and these Mic Check supporters. Eric Sumner, Yukofin, Thomas Oberson, Mighty Mix, Juka Tiburon Lena, Stephen Bonnerman, The Not So Evil Engineer, Pavel Zdanov, Jason Yanity, Kale the Quick, Drazion, Michael McClintock, Stephen Stager, Julien Gelafont, Marius Fieldvold, Craig Mortel, Speedy Savant, Neil Blakey Milner, Aaron Toyson, and everyone who watches, shares, favorites, and subscribes to this series. Thank you so, so much.